In the dawn age of Westeros, before the coming of man and the raising of castles and cities, there were only the children of the forest. Little is known of them now, but it is said they were small in stature, dark and beautiful, and no taller than children when grown to manhood. They lived in the depths of the forests in hidden villages, crannogs and caves. They hunted with weirwood bows and armed themselves with blades of obsidian. Their wise men were called green seers and were possessed of a powerful magic. They worshipped nameless, faceless gods of the forest, stream and stone. According to legend, it was they who carved faces in the great white trunks of the majestic weirwoods. Their deep-cut eyes were red with sap and ever watchful.
War did not come to Westeros with men. In the dawn of days, the children of the forest fought the giants. But neither race sought to destroy the other, or lay claim to the continent. They couldn't. The children hunted and fought with dragon-glass arrows and spears, and the giants had only the branches they pulled from trees. Nor could both races fill more than one of the 7 kingdoms of today. Then the southern deserts coughed up a new race, the first men, who had crossed the narrow sea over the Arm of Dorne. Unlike the children and giants, the first men lived in huts and villages and farmed the land to eat. And there were so many. As the numbers swelled, men needed ever more fields and timber. Of course, they saw that the great forests could provide both. When they cut into the deep woods, however, they stumbled on a strange sight. A white tree with red leaves and a face staring back at them. At first they were afraid, but the face never spoke, even when the axe bit into it. The first men didn't know what a weirwood was. They didn't know that a weirwood grows forever if left in peace, or that the native children believed their spirits went into it after death. The children had no letters or runes, all of the history, songs and prayers, only the trees remembered. When the children looked at the cleared fields, they saw not white stumps, but their ancestors now lost forever, with their bones stolen to line the invaders' walls. Driven mad by grief, the children attacked. The first men had never seen a weirwood, but the children had never seen bronze. Their dragon-glass arrows glanced off the first men's shields, and their armor of woven bark split beneath the first men's swords. As the war raged, the children resorted to the one advantage they had, the magic of their old gods. Their green seers enlisted dire wolves and snow bears, cave lions and eagles, mammoths and serpents. In return, the first men cut down and burned every weirwood they could find, fearing that the children would spy on them through the faces in the trees. The children became desperate. Their green seers called down the Hammer of Waters to break the Arm of Dorne, destroying the bridge that men crossed into Westeros, and to flood the neck to contain men to the south. But the first men would not be stopped. Fearing extinction, the children combined their powers for one last spell that would save their people and their land from the invaders. By themselves, the children were too few to resist the onslaught. But if they could turn men's numbers against them? After hundreds of years and untold death and destruction, the wisest heads of the children and the first men finally prevailed. The children couldn't win this war, and the first men didn't want to win, fearing the cost of victory. Heroes and rulers on both sides met upon an isle in the God's Eye to form the pact. The children gave up all the lands of Westeros, save for the deep forests, and the first men swore that they would no longer cut down the weirwoods. Thus ended the Dawn Age and began the Age of Heroes. Yet after the dawn must come the night. The great evil that the children unleashed in the war returned centuries later, and only an alliance between the children and men defeated it. Now it comes again, when the children are a shadow of what they were, and men have long forgotten.
But the pack could not withstand the coming of the Andals, a race of tall, fair-haired warriors. They attacked with fire and weapons of steel, slaughtering the children of the forest wherever they could find them, burning out their weirwood groves, hacking away at the faces of the old gods, and spreading their own religion through the land. Centuries of war followed, and the Andals conquered every kingdom in Westeros, save one, the North. The kings of winter were able to withstand the Andal invasion, and descendants of the first men dwell there to this day, and continue to worship the old gods. As for the children of the forest, those who survived the slaughter were said to have fled far north and have not been seen again. Most assume they're long dead, and some don't believe they ever existed. They live on only through song and legend, and in the faces of the weirwood trees. The Kingdom of the North, the Kingdom of the Mountain and the Vale, the Iron Islands, the Kingdom of the Rock, the Kingdom of the Reach, the Stormlands, and Dawn. These regions had been established by the first men thousands of years before, in the Age of Heroes. One hero of this fabled age was Bran the Builder. Bran raised the wall and built the stronghold of Winterfell, establishing House Stark and reigning as the first king in the north. Other legends tell of the Grey King in the Iron Islands. Grey King took a mermaid to wife and defeated Naga, the first sea dragon. House Greyjoy of Pike, the current rulers of the region, claim to descend from him. House Casterly ruled the gold-rich Westerlands from their mighty seat of Casterly Rock, but their lands and power were swindled from them by the legendary trickster Lann the Clever. The noble house of Lannister is said to have descended from him. The verdant and fertile lands of the Reach were first ruled by House Gardener, whose founder, known as Garth Greenhand, wore a crown of flowers and vines. He ruled from Highgarden as the first king of the Reach, and was said to have made the land bloom. Many noble houses trace their bloodlines back to him, including the current lords of Highgarden, House Tyrell. In the Stormlands, according to ballads of the age, a warrior named Durin fell in love with Elenai, whose father was god of the sea and mother was goddess of the wind. She gave her maidenhead to him, committing herself to a mortal life. Enraged, her parents called upon the winds and waters, destroying Daren's Bayside Keep and wiping out his wedding guests. Daren declared war on the gods and rebuilt his keep, which was also destroyed. 4 more castles he raised, each stronger than the last. All fell to the power of the gods. But Daren's 7th castle, Storm's End, withstood the gods' rage. Durin became known as Durin Godsgrief, and reigned as the first Storm King. There are countless other tales from the Age of Heroes, too many to count. These histories weren't recorded in a book, but passed down from generation to generation through story and song. And while some of them may be dismissed as fairy tales, every one of the 7 kingdoms is defined by them.
The North is by far the largest of the 7 kingdoms, and can fit the other 6 inside it. Not that the others care. Cold and damp, that's how the Southerners see the North. But without the cold, a man can't appreciate the fire in his hearth. Without the rain, a man can't appreciate the roof over his head. Let the South have its sun, flowers and affectations. We Northerners have home. Mine was once Winterfell, the ancient seat of my father's family, House Stark, who have ruled the North since the first men and were once the kings of winter. Our land stretches from the wall down to the neck, a narrow land that divides us from the rest of Westeros. Legend has it that the children of the forest flooded it in their war against the first men. If that's true, every Northman owes them a debt of gratitude. The swamps of the neck are as good as the wall for keeping out unwelcome armies, And if the swamps don't deter you, the Crannog men should. Small, shy people who rarely leave those swamps, and who follow House Reed, the gatekeepers of the North, and among the most important and loyal bannermen of House Stark. As for the other great northern houses, the Starks brought them into the fold during the Age of Heroes. The Stark wrestled an Ironborn for Bear Island and gave it to the Mormonts. The Stark granted a keep and land to a younger son, Carlon, in return for putting down a rebellion. His family then grew up into the Karstarks. Starks fought the wildlings and their kings beyond the wall beside the Umbers of Last Earth, thus earning their fealty. Boltons. Back then they were the bane of the North. A few were even rumoured to wear their enemies' flayed skins as cloaks. But after centuries of war, they too bent the knee. And so House Stark became the kings in the North, the Wall. Many think of it as the end of the world, but it's not. I've seen how the land stretches much farther than any man knows, into the land of always winter where the White Walkers came from during the long night. After the first men and the children of the forest beat them back, Brandon the Builder raised the wall and set up the Night's Watch to guard the realms of men. He gave us our oath, our castles and the gift, the lands behind the wall whose farmers and crops sustain us. Southerners may now mock my black brothers as thieves, rapers and worse, and not without cause. But the North remembers why we are there, and if we fall, the South will get a very harsh and very cold reminder.
According to legend, a huntsman once tracked a lion that was terrorizing his village all the way to its den. Though armed with only a spear, the man managed to kill both the lion and its mate, but spared the cubs. This mercy so pleased the old gods that they sent a shaft of sunlight deep into the cave, gleaming off golden walls. The hunter became a miner and built a ring fort to guard his new wealth. Nobody ever asks what happened to the cubs. Maybe the gods forgot about them and they starved. Maybe there never were any cubs or lions or hunter. Doesn't matter. Someone found enough gold in that cave to buy whatever truth he wanted, along with a castle that he'd name after his new family. Casterly Rock. Thanks to that gold, Casterly Rock soon became the largest, wealthiest, and best defended castle in Westeros. An army that struggled up the main approach would still have to climb thick, high, and well-defended walls. Should they choose instead to lay siege, the sea helpfully carved a massive cave beneath the castle, which over time became a private port complete with docks, wharves, and shipyards. And so, to this day, even with all the gold in Westeros to tempt invaders, Casterly Rock has never fallen. At least, not in battle. The castle is sadly all that remains of its namesake family, the Casterlys. According to another legend, my ancestor, Lan the Clever, swindled the castle from them. The most common story is that he found a hidden cleft in the rock and snuck into the castle. At night, he whispered threats into sleeping ears, howled in the darkness, planted one brother's treasures in the room of another, and so forth. By the end of his games, the Casterlys believed a demon was haunting their home and fled. My brother prefers a different version. Lan the Clever did find a secret entrance into the rock, but used it to have his way with the Casterly maidens. Eventually, the girls gave birth to golden-haired bastards, and the Casterlys had no choice but to accept their father into the family. In gratitude, he changed the family name to honor himself, and House Lannister was born. The Casterlys used the gold of the rock to become lords. The Lannisters became kings. For thousands of years, the Kingdom of the Rock ruled the Westerlands.
Our lush island sits on calm blue water like an emerald set into a sapphire. You would never guess that such a vision is only the sheath hiding the blade of Shipbreaker Bay, with its treacherous tides, unpredictable gales, and sharp rocks lurking just below the water's surface. The storms that blow through the bay water the Kingswood and Rainwood, two of the great forests of Westeros, and they give the Stormlands their name. Even without our weather, we have more than earned our name in strife. The first Storm King, Durin, started his reign by declaring war on the gods themselves. He loved the daughter of the sea god and the wind goddess, but they forbade the union. At their wedding, the gods unleashed their might, pulling down his hold and killing all of Durin's family and guests, though his wife shielded him. Durin vowed to rebuild, and when he did, the gods again destroyed his home. His counselors begged him to retreat inland, but he would not abandon his war. Finally, with the council of the Children of the Forest, or perhaps a young Bran the Builder, Durin raised a seventh castle that, try as they might, and still do, the wind and sea gods could not tear asunder. Durin took the name God's Grief and called his new home Storm's End. Having beaten the waters to the east, the Storm Kings turned their gaze to more practical enemies, the Reach, Riverlands, and Dawn. For thousands of years, the Storm Kings fought the Gardener Kings of the Reach and various families of Dawn for control of the Dornish marches just below the Red Mountains. The fighting didn't stop until Dawn married into the Seven Kingdoms, a mere 100 years ago. But still the houses of the Stormlands, such as the Dondarians, guard the Boneway, the mountain pass into the Marches, against any Dornish incursion. The Storm Kings had greater luck to their north, at first. They took the trident from the River Kings and built an empire that stretched as far as the neck. But then the Ironborn swarmed out of their islands and pushed the Storm Kings out of the Riverlands.
Impregnable. That's how the Vale sees itself. Shielded from Westeros by its mountains. They call the entrance to their land the Bloody Gate because, during the Age of Heroes, a dozen armies supposedly smashed themselves against it. Even if they'd gotten through, the roads of the Vale are narrow, steep, and treacherous. Half the men would have slipped to their deaths, or frozen in the mountain snow. Or so the common wisdom goes. Except the Vale has been conquered. Those vaunted mountains didn't stop the Andals who came by the Eastern Sea. No army in the Seven Kingdoms can match the pride and chivalry of the Knights of the Vale. After all, they were the first true knights in Westeros. The Knights of the Vale were originally the Knights of Andalos, an eastern nation whose people invaded Westeros thousands of years ago. From the sea, the Vale seemed to the Andals an ideal new home, a wide, fertile valley isolated from the rest of Westeros and its kingdoms by a great mountain range. The first men who held it, moreover, were sparse and divided, and waded into battle with bronze axes and armor that couldn't match Andal horses and steel. But what the first men lacked in weaponry, they made up for in ferocity. Finally uniting behind King Robar Royce, the first men smashed the Andals in battle after battle, reclaiming the Vale and pushing the invaders back to the sea from whence they'd come. Learning from the first men, the remaining Andals united behind a leader of their own, not a king or a lord, but a knight who'd been born in the Vale and knew it as well as the first men. Sir Artus Arryn, known as the Falcon Knight. The armies of the first men and the Andals met beneath the Giant's Lance to decide the fate of the Vale. Sir Artus had many more mounted knights than the first men who preferred to fight on foot. But the first men had seized the high ground, digging trenches in front of their ranks and lining them with sharpened stakes smeared with offal and excrement. 6 times the Andal knights charged, and 6 times the first men threw them back. But on the 7th, a fearsome Andal warrior broke through the ranks of the first men, and the Andals rushed through the gap. If King Robar had been wiser, he would have retreated and saved his army for another day. Then again, if he'd been wise at all, he'd never have risked his army of foot soldiers against mounted knights in the first place. When King Robar saw the falcon helm of Sir Artus across the field, he wagered that the Andals would break if they lost their leader, and rode hard for the Falcon Knight. The singers paint a pretty picture of the battle. The king in flashing bronze armor, the knight in silvered steel. But the duel lasted no longer than a verse of the songs. For King Robar had taken a Valyrian sword off a dead Andal lord, and it sheared through Sir Artus' helm much like a bird's wing through the air. As the falcon knight tumbled to earth, King Robur thought he'd won his desperate gamble. Then he heard the trumpets behind him. When he turned, he saw 500 fresh Andal knights pouring down the giant's lance. And the man at its head was also the man at Robur's feet. For Sir Artus, unique in that age, or indeed any age, esteemed cunning even more than martial strength, and had clad one of his knights in his spare suit of armor, leaving him to die at Robur's hand, while Sir Artus took his best horsemen up a goat track he knew from childhood. The charge of the Andal Knights broke the last great army of the First Men, who would never again threaten the new Knights of the Vale. Some of the defeated would even join their ranks in the years to come, but many more fled to the mountains, choosing savagery over submission. Ever since, the Knights of the Vale enjoyed an exclusive position in Westeros. They could sally forth from the Vale at will, knowing that if battle went against them, they could retreat through the Bloody Gate, where no army could follow.
The truth is that House Gardner built Highgarden when they ruled the Reach as kings, not lords. And as their name attests, they were the true heirs of Garth the Gardener, who founded their house and the kingdom, and brought law and order to the Reach. He built Highgarden as a fortress, not a pleasure palace. In those dark days, the Ironborn raided up and down the Mander at will, and the Dornish were even more trouble than they are now. While enduring shame, a Dornish army once sacked Highgarden and destroyed the Oakenseat, the living throne of the Gardener kings planted by Garth Greenhand himself. The Gardeners responded wisely, sending armies of their own to pacify and defend the countryside. My ancestors at Horn Hill joined them, as did the other great families of the Reach. Even House Hightower yielded without a fight, choosing marriage into House Gardner over a war that would weaken us against outsiders. But the outsiders still came. The Andals swept across Westeros, destroying many ancient families and kingdoms. When the invaders arrived at the Reach, led by Sir Alistair Tyrell, House Gardner chose accommodation over battle, hoping honors and marriages would sate the foreigners' ambitions. The Tyrells were welcomed into service as hereditary stewards of Highgarden.
The Seven are gods of weakness and defeat, pretty chains that the First Men kindly put on after the Andals crushed them, except in the Iron Islands. Since the Dawn Age, the Ironborn have followed the drowned god, who plucked fire from the sea and made us to reave and sack and carve our names in blood and song. When the Andals landed on the Iron Islands, they found a god who was father, warrior, and stranger, who took mother, maiden, and crone when he would, and held the smith in thrall. His priests are the drowned men, who are clothed and armed by the sea itself. They consecrate us to the drowned god through our most sacred rite, the drowning, and ask the god to raise us from the sea as he was, harder and stronger. The Ironborn do not fear the bloodiest battles or the roughest waves, for the drowned god taught us long ago that what is dead may never die. When an Ironborn falls, we say the drowned god needed a strong oarsman and took him below to feast in the god's watery halls, attended by mermaids. But even in death, an Ironborn is a warrior. We fight against the storm god, who holds a castle in the clouds, and sends the winds to lure the Ironborn off course or wreck our ships. It's said my legendary ancestor, the Grey King, waged war upon the storm god for 1,000 years. With the drowned god's help, he slew the great sea dragon Naga and used her bones for his haul. After his death, the storm god tried to wash away any memory of this terrible foe, but his songs fill our halls to this day. It was the storm god who first blew the Andals to the Iron Islands, to subdue us and turn us from our faith. True, they conquered and killed our king, but in time they forsook their septs for the shore, and their fat septons for the drowned men. The Andals came to us as conquerors. In the end, they drowned.